Donnie Dustin, Water Resources Manager. I started this job almost a year ago, and trial by fire, literally and figuratively. Our division is responsible for getting the water rights and the water supplies that go to our treatment plant and make it out to our customers, as well as helping getting water rights to the different ditches through town to irrigate parks, golf courses, schools, and the like. City is very fortunate to have planned appropriately for situations like a fire in our basin. We have two sources of supply, not just the Poudre River. The other source is the Colorado Big Thompson, or CBT project, of which we get our supply out of Horsetooth Reservoir. And on average, we use about a 50-50 split between those two sources. On the river, we mostly live off direct flow rights. That means when the river has water in it, we have rights to be able to take some of that. We do not have a lot of storage in the Poudre Basin. Joe Wright Reservoir is the only storage we have up by Cameron Pass. The CBT project, that's a project that's administered by the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, also known as Northern Water. They set a quota each spring, so we don't know the amount of water we're going to get from that source just yet. The reason they do that supply was built back in the 50s, actually started back in the 30s, as a supplemental supply for this region. So when snowpack's low, they tend to give a high allocation. When it's pretty wet and things are pretty good here, they give a lower quota. The delivery to the city is out of Horsetooth Reservoir. We do not own or operate that reservoir. We're actually only about a 6 or 7% ownership in the entire project. So they do have some policies that limit the amount of carryover, or the amount we can save in Horsetooth for use in the following years. So in summary of last year, the fires in the Poudre Canyon certainly affected our ability to be able to treat that Poudre River water. We were unable to take any river water for over 3 months, partly because the fire was happening and not much of anyone could go up into the canyon during that. Certainly during rain events, I'm sure all of you saw the river when it would turn black, and treatment plant just can't take that. They can't, clog their filters and whatnot. And also we were putting systems in place to be able to tell when the water quality goes bad, and so there were water quality monitors put in place, precipitation gauges to be able to tell and try to react to it pretty quickly as we get into this year. We have been able to treat water through most of the winter. However, when it starts raining, and also when the runoff comes up and the water comes up and stirs up sediments in the river, we're anticipating it's going to be pretty difficult to take that water. Last year, we had 100% or a maximum allocation from the CBT project. So that is why we did not go on restrictions. We had an adequate supply to meet all our demands, plus maximize the amount we could carry over for use in this year. So really restrictions, we had no place to save it. So our prior conservation efforts, since a decade ago when we were on restrictions because of the drought then, as a whole, our community has reduced its use by 25%. And if that hadn't happened, we would have been on restrictions and things would be in a lot worse shape than they are for this coming year. City uses on average around 26,000 acre feet. So I can't do the percentage in my head. I'm a calculator junkie, so. But it's a pretty good percentage. Plus that does not include what we were able to save in Joe Wright Reservoir, but we're not sure if we'll be able to treat that directly based on how things might end up this year. So this is a picture of the High Park fire, where it occurred in the Poudre River. You can kind of see Horsetooth Reservoir and Fort Collins over here, and as you go upstream. Unfortunately, our diversions off the Poudre are right at the base of where all that fire occurred. So when rain falls on top of that, it washes that stuff down and it comes right to where we divert off the river. We do have a pipeline out of Horsetooth Reservoir, so that's mostly what we treated during the fire, and we'll be relying heavily on that this year. In addition to the fire impacts, our snowpack conditions aren't that great. As you all know, we missed out on what we thought was going to be a big dump this past weekend, but we still are seeing decent snowpacks, 70% in the South Platte Basin, 78% statewide. In the Poudre Basin, this is just a comparison with past years of where our snowpack went. 2002 was a big critical year, and at this time, it was about 75% of average. But by May 1st, when we typically see the peak snowpack, it was down to 51%. Last year was astronomical. We had a half-decent 73% snowpack, and it just stopped snowing at this point on, and it got hot, it evaporated off, and by May 1st, we were at 32%. And then this year, we're at about 69%. Who knows? I didn't put on here years when it was about the same snowpack, and it went up. It can go either way. We're just going to have to wait and see. So in summary, you know, the reason we're going on water restrictions is mostly related to the fire and the inability to take Poudre River water. We are working on building a sedimentation basin. We actually have 2 pipelines off the river, and one of them does not have a sedimentation basin, and that allows some of the stuff in the water to filter out before it goes to the treatment plant. And we're hopeful that that will help us take more of the river water. And then persistent drought. That more applies to the CBT quota that we might receive. We will not know what that is until April 12th, and that will dictate whether or not we need to go on higher level of restrictions. Pretty hopeful that we will stay at level 1 at least, but if we get a very low quota, we might have to go to a higher level. So the restrictions, as mentioned before, and I think it has it on here, we will be starting level 1 restrictions on April 1st. These are according to a water supply shortage response plan that was adopted a decade ago. And for those that were here at the time, that was a pretty good plan for us. It did what we needed. The community came together to reduce their use to the supplies we had at that time, and it was pretty effective. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lucas to kind of step through the restrictions and other elements of that, unless anybody had any questions. So the question was, why don't we stay on a continual restrictions mode? And I'd like to distinguish between water conservation and water restrictions. Conservation, which we have had a program in place since the 70s to reduce our use every year. And like I said, in the last decade, our use has dropped 25%, which is very significant. So I'd like to think that we are doing that. Restrictions, we plan for a 1 in 50 type drought. So we try to have a supply that can get us through a 1 in 50 type drought. And for droughts greater than that, we have to rely on restrictions, mandatory reduce your use restrictions to get our demands down to the supply we have at that time. This has been policy that's been in place for almost 30 years. We actually just updated that policy this past fall to continue that same thing, that in most years we have an adequate supply. We're still working on conservation and trying to get our use down. We have a water conservation goal to reduce our use even another 7%, and I believe Lucas and others at the city are working on updating that in the coming year. So it's part of our system, our water supply system, to be able to rely on restrictions. And if we ramped everything down to the minimal possible, when we get into a drought higher than we've planned for, we won't have that flexibility to reduce.
On to a little bit of the nitty-gritty of the restrictions. By the way, all of this is online on our website, which we've kind of dedicated for water restrictions, which is fcgov.com/water-restrictions. And on there you can find the full ordinance with every nitty-gritty detail that you would ever want, and everything that's happening with it. And as well as it's going to be posting the most current information we have on our supply resources and where we're at with restrictions. So again, we're starting April 1st with what we call response level 1. And if you live somewhere else up and down the Front Range, does anybody live in Loveland or out of the city of Fort Collins and other districts or whatnot? So other water districts may or may not be, going on restrictions this year. Each municipality or water district is essentially on their own to figure out their supply and whether to go on them. But I will tell you, every major water supplier is either already on restrictions or is going to start them this spring up and down the Front Range, from Colorado Springs to us. So it's going to be a pretty ubiquitous decision up and down and most of them are going to this roughly the same kind of response level, lawn watering to 2 days a week and similar kind of things, although they change up and down the Front Range. Denver Water's probably got the most recent updates, and theirs has indoor and all kinds of other stuff. So anyways, Loveland hasn't decided whether they're going to, and Fort Collins, the bordering water districts to Fort Collins Utilities District, the bordering districts haven't formally said, but they have essentially in conversations said they're going to follow what Fort Collins does. So if you're in Fort Collins Loveland Water District or Elko, around the city area, they'll probably be going into what a similar water restrictions for us. What they do with that exactly and how they do it, though, is up to them, and so you'll have to check in with them to find the exact info. All right, so starting April 1st, we're going to be going down to 2 days a week for lawn watering. Now again, this is not tree watering or shrub watering or flower watering. It's lawn watering. That's going to be Tuesday and Friday for commercial providers. And the residential even and odd addresses split between the other days of the week except for Monday. So there's not going to be any standard lawn watering on Monday. The only lawn watering you're going to see on Monday is going to be new turf or new seed projects, and potentially people with medical or other hardships that have to use those days. Those are going to be really limited. And in general, there is no watering between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. This is usually a good practice anyways. Some of the larger areas in town, larger turf areas, you just need that time to work through that. This year, we're not going to have that time from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. unless you're doing maintenance. So we'll get into permits on how to get around that 2-day limit, especially since we're going to have the 8 hours during the middle of the day off limits. Yes? CSU mainly uses raw water. Carol can talk to that more if she wanted to, but they generally use raw water, and raw water and well water is not under these restrictions. This is for our treated water that we source from the Poudre River and Horsetooth, treat, put into pipes, and send out to people. So that's what we have purview over. We don't have anything over raw and well water. We don't want to either. People will have to sign their yards or turf areas if they're watering with well or raw water, and they want to do it outside the restrictions. And so we can get into a little bit more about that, but what people are going to do exactly with that depends on the company. And so there's a lot of businesses around town that use raw water or ditch water to water their turf areas. So there are quite a few of the larger commercial places in town that have larger turf areas that are, and the school district, yep, and the city parks and that kind of thing. So about 80% of city park watering is from raw water. So not just the city park, but all city parks and golf courses and playing fields and all of that. About 80% of that is raw ditch water. Again, maintenance is allowed on off days or from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. when you're actually at work. That's handy. But trying to keep it as minimum as possible and trying to do it as quickly as possible. And that's as much as a perception thing as it is a actual wasting water. There's no spraying of impervious surfaces, which sounds kind of benign, but that essentially means no power washing of decks, patios, driveways, parking lots, anything along those lines, unless it's for health and safety reasons. So if there's food that's spilled on the ground and you need to get that off of there to prevent mice from coming and eating it on your restaurant patio or something like that, that's going to be accepted. And the other part, it might hit some people in this room, is limited car washing, and the biggest one of that is car dealerships are limited to washing their cars once per week maximum in level 1. That decreases in the higher levels. We're going to be doing some outreach to car dealerships in particular in town just to let them know as we roll into the restrictions about that. If you know any people who work at car dealerships, please let them know. So that's what level 1 water restrictions look like. Again, it's mainly focused on lawn watering. It doesn't have, these are all outdoor water use restrictions. We are not restricting water use on the inside, so we're not telling restaurants they can't serve water. We're encouraging them to wait until somebody asks until they give them water, but most of them do that anyways. We're not limiting how people wash their commercial laundries or anything like that on the inside. Yes? The question's about water leaving the property or flowing off the property into the street. And that would fall, if it's our treated water that's happening with, that would fall under our wasting water ordinance that we have in effect all the time. So essentially, at any point, if somebody is overwatering their lawn, it's coming onto the sidewalk, down the storm drain, then neighbors actually call on that on a regular basis. And neighbors love to call on neighbors. I don't know why. But so that's in effect all the time, and that's been in effect for the last, I think, 11 years since we updated the water shortage response plan. So that's all part of it, and we will be enforcing that as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. That's a really good question. I'll have to get back to you, the group on that one, whether there's a fine. I know about because that's a different ordinance than the water shortage response one, which I do know that the fines associated with that, just because they're two different parts of the code. So higher levels, just to go through them really quickly, if necessary, our response level 2, lawn watering, would be down to 1 day a week, and there would be a rate increase. That's the biggest one that will affect more people. That would affect whether you're using water indoor or outdoor. That would just be an actual increase. I'm going to go through the proposed rate increases and how you would give feedback into that process in a little bit, but in the ordinance, it's written in that we would essentially raise rates in levels 2 and higher. So response level 3 would be down to 2 hours per week of lawn watering. That 1 day per week, still on a particular day at 2 hours per week, and this is in the middle of the summer. And that you might think, well, that's going to turn a lot of lawns brown. But again, if we are to the point where we are that short on water, that is essentially what the council and the community has called for, is to cut back on lawn watering to make up the difference. And response level 4 would be no lawn watering in the middle of the summer, and another increase in rates. So I'll go through those rate increases in a little bit. I think it might be even my next slide. Any questions on that, though, on the higher response levels? Yeah, so the question was, in restrictions, the rates go up. Do they go back down after restrictions end? And the answer is yes. So they're only in effect during the restrictions time. We will notify if we have emails of folks who who have gotten permits from us. So say if you guys get a permit for a larger property, or you give us your email as part of getting a raw water sign, or not that it's mandatory in all those cases, but if we have email contacts, we will email as well. And we will also post going to higher levels of restrictions in the newspaper, on the radio, and we will also be doing probably extra flyers or bill inserts to each customer. Whether it's a bill insert or whether it's a postcard, we'll probably be doing a mailing as well to let everyone know if we have to go to higher levels. I can't tell you exactly what we're going to do because we haven't defined that precisely, but we will do as much campaigning and media towards it as we are now getting the word out about level 1. The question was, are there trigger dates for these response levels to go up? And what the second part was, what happens if, per se, we're in a real high response level, like response level 4, come September? And I'm guessing you're asking, and then lawn watering is not going to be effective, or decreasing lawn watering is not going to be effective anymore. And I'm looking at Donnie. I think it'd be better if he answered these questions.
I can pretty much guarantee we will not be on level 4. Right now, we're hearing from the Northern Water District that we might get a 50 or 60% quota. At a 60, I think we can stay on level 1. At a 50, I'm not sure. I think it would be level 2. There are other means we're looking at to increase the amount of CBT we can get besides what comes in on the quota. All this stuff won't be determined until the quota is declared. So I will be going to City Council in a work session on April 23rd to discuss everything. I'll be a very busy guy at that point to try to talk about triggers. I'm really hopeful that we won't be, I can say for certainty we won't be in level 4. Level 3, I seriously doubt it. Maybe level 2. So don't be too alarmed by what you see up here. Once they declare the quota for the CBT project and we get that allocation of water, it's kind of irregardless of rain. It certainly makes me nervous when it doesn't rain or precipitate, you know, in the reservoirs that capture water and whatnot. But that's really will be the dictator for our supply from that system. If it doesn't rain around here, it's kind of a twofold thing. It means you need to irrigate more, but what it means for the treatment plant is there's no rain on that fire area, and we can treat that water. So that makes it a little easier too. So I don't know what to wish for anymore. I still think a high snowpack, I think the best case scenario would be to have a really high snowpack and a lot of rain and just flush that baby out and hopefully have a better year next year. So we're going to learn a lot this year about how to treat the water, you know, where we'll end up at the end of the year, and have a better feeling for, you know, this may go on for a couple of years depending on how difficult it is to treat that water. So, and I will speak, I meant to do this, that there was a lot of mitigation done on the burn area last year before winter set in. I don't have specifics on the amount. We just found out yesterday that the federal government's going to allow more funding to do additional mitigation work on the burn area. There was a lot of, you know, the sequestration, the Sandy created a lot of need for funds to repair some of what happened there, but the Natural Conservation Resource Service will be taking care of some of that mitigation. So we're looking forward to trying to help mitigate that, and we're doing just about everything we can to combat this situation. So we're having conversations, not me, but the water treatment plant, with the Northern District about, you know, what would happen in that case. There was a fire in Fern Lake up near Rocky Mountain National Park, and that watershed does go into part of the system, but they don't think there'll be any complications from that. There's a number of reservoirs before it makes it to Horsetooth, so it depends on where a fire would be, you know, what impact it would have to the different reservoirs in the system and whatnot. So it's kind of hard to answer. We just have to wait and see, but it's certainly a concern. Do we sell water to others, including other water districts as well as local farmers? So in terms of the water districts, we do provide some water there. Otherwise, as Lucas mentioned earlier, those districts have their own water supplies. And Lucas didn't mention it, but the city's surrounded by two main other water districts, Fort Collins, Loveland Water District to the south, and they're essentially a lot of customers south of Harmony Road. So if you're down there, you might actually be one of those customers. The other one is the East Larimer County Water District, and they serve kind of the northeast part of Fort Collins. And both those districts mostly use CBT water. So they're not as impacted as we are from you know, the fires in the canyon. So as Lucas mentioned, restrictions might be completely different for them. And we've been in contact with what we're going to do. I think I've heard Fort Collins, Loveland say they'll follow what we're doing with level 1. I don't think they would go to any higher level. In terms of the ag community, in most years when we have a surplus of water, we do rent that to the agricultural community. Most notably the North Poudre Irrigation Company, which irrigates north of town, up in the Wellington area and farther north. Knowing what our situation was, we told them way back in November that we're not going to be able to rent any water there. And in fact, we've done something that we've never done before. There's a portion of the shares we own in that company that we can't use for treated water use. And we've entered a swap deal with them where for those who still have shares in that company up there, if they give us the portion of the water that we can use, we'll give them our portion at a 1.5 ratio. And we've had an overwhelming response, and that's going to make a big difference to keeping us on level 1 this year. The deadline for getting those in is this Friday, and we're getting 3 times the amount we thought we were going to get. So it's a very cooperative relationship we've had for years with that company, and although it's really impacting those who don't own a lot of shares up there, you know, we're doing our best, and this may be something that we'll enter into the future and try to secure this as a means of getting through situations like this in the future. We have not knowingly given any water to fracking, to the oil and gas industry. Given our situation, we don't really have any water to give to the oil and gas industry, and although there's no official policy, we're not renting anything to the oil and gas industry.
All right, so some quick permits and exemptions, again, on the website, which is in the little flyer brochure that's up front. I see a lot of people grab that. That has the website address on it with the level 1 info. And so that's where you can go for all of this info. There will be medical and religious permits for those who need those. Properties larger than 4 acres can apply for more watering days to meet the requirements. And new seed and sod will also be given 3 to 4 weeks to establish it. And then at that point, though, new seed and new sod will have to go back to the restrictions level that's in place at that point. So if we happen to be in level 2 restrictions and there's new sod 3 weeks in, the establishment watering would have to come off, and you'd be down to 1 day a week. So it's going to be pretty hard if that happens, and we're going to try to make people aware as they're going through the permit process that it's a possibility. Even going down to 2 days a week can probably shock the turf or seed pretty hard. So anyways, that's something to be aware of if you're looking at new installations, especially if you're a landscaping company. We're gonna try to be as effective and timely as possible with all these permits. So the max turnaround time we're allowed on these is 5 days. We're going to try to get them turned around in just a couple for anybody, just so they can get going as fast as possible after letting us know. Golf courses and public playing fields will also have permits they can apply for, but again, all of those must post signs so that the public knows, and then we'll have the permit on record in case anybody calls asking about it. Again, raw and well water users are not technically restricted. However, anyone who is on those systems, if there's any way you can possibly comply with the restrictions anyways, which would be as much of a perception, again, as much of a perception thing as anything for the community, and that would be great. And we have, you guys, most of the people with raw water or well water, or especially raw water, ditch water users, have a lot of resources because they're usually larger properties. But any assistance we can be for improving system efficiency or anything like that, or help with finding people to help you with that, we would be willing to do that. And again, signs will be available for free for raw and well water users. You know, we don't have that written in. I think one every 500 feet would be great, but that's a lot. So, you know, that's probably some certain properties will. It needs to be obvious, and we'll work with you on that. The question was, is there a deadline for any of the permits? And there's not. So, the only deadline is before a larger property starts watering more than the 2 days, the Tuesday and Friday. If you're watering outside of those days, you need to have a permit in place. So at any point during the summer, you could apply for a permit for any of those things. Who is the permit holder? The permit holder is the probably usually going to be the person or the contact for the utility bill. But technically, the permit holder and the person responsible for following restrictions and ultimately responsible for any warnings or citations is the person, and this is the way it's written into the ordinance, the person responsible for the watering. So that's not necessarily the utility bill holder. That could be a landscaping company or a property management company that's doing that. So ultimately, it's the person responsible for that. And on the citation part, out of a couple thousand contacts that we made 10 years ago, there were 3 citations. So very few. We're going to be trying to keep those to an absolute minimum. Yes, and they're in the process of being made right now. Yes, are there specific signs was the question. And yes, we're making them right now, and they'll be available along with the permits in short time. Definitely before April 1st. We're trying to get all the permits in that part done in the next roughly about a week. is there any flexibility in the establishment period? So essentially, can you extend the establishment period? And this has come up a couple times already. And as far as we can see in the ordinance and the way it's written in there, no, there's no flexibility there. Sorry. It's going to be. It's going to be. I don't know the answer from 10 years ago whether anybody did get denied. The places where you might get denied is if you're asking for 5 days, and say on a larger property, if you're asking for more days than is necessary to put down, there's also essentially an inch per week amount, and that's all written into the ordinance. It's different. There's about 3 different ones, so I don't know them off the top of my head right now. So if you're asking for way more time than is necessary to water that amount, it would just be cut back. Or if you're asking for a second round of seed or sod establishment permits, then that might be denied. But so I don't know of any denials from the last time we went through restrictions. I don't imagine there's going to be a lot of them, though. The question is, can you get extra days if you're installing a smart controller or an ET-based controller? And again, with the way the ordinance is written, at this point, we don't have the flexibility to do that. And as a side note on that though, although ET controllers are great and fabulous, it's kind of taking that functionality a little bit out of the controller. Most of them should be able to follow, have the water windows set to go on those 2 days and water the amount that is necessary. Tony Koski from CSU, the turf specialist there, and others around the West do claim that watering less often and deeper is more effective than more often and shallower, which would effectively be what we're forcing the controller to do. So hypothetically, horticulturally, that would be more effective that way. But yes, it does take some of the functionality of a basic ET controller out of it. So, and no, we won't be able to permit for extra days for those, although other districts do. So you might hear that from other places. So the question is, each tap is allowed a certain allotment. Well, it's also, there's 2 things here. There's a monthly amount before you cross into the conservation tier, as we call it. There's also a yearly amount before you cross the allotment threshold, I'll say. And at both of those, there's a step up in price. And I'm guessing you're more looking at the yearly allotment. Yeah. So for the yearly allotment, is there a way, but with multiple meters, to essentially transfer water from one to the other? And the answer is no, because the way they're set up and the fees are paid for in the development process, and the way that we have to administer them, we can't just transfer water from one to the other. So any allotment, any money, any amount of water that you go over the allotment on any meter, you have to pay the raw water surcharge fee for that. Yeah, we have discussed ways to work with that, and what we've been doing is we have essentially a list of the highest users over their allotment, and we contacted them already to let them know that restrictions were happening, the potential of the allotment, the proposed rate increase for the raw water surcharge as well, which we'll get into in just a sec here. But there is an opportunity to essentially buy more water rights to make up that difference on that one tap, but not to be able to transfer them between them at this point that I've been able to find out. So these are the proposed rates going to council on March 18th. Is the first reading now. They were supposed to go last week, but the fracking debate and a couple others held back the night so long that they waited, and they held it off till a special session on March 18th. That's a Monday night, I believe. Donnie would know. Donnie will be there. So if you wanted to give input into this process and into the rates, that is the place that you would go to do that. So this is just real quick for single-family homes by level. So all the charts are going to look roughly the same here. So there's tiers for gallons used, our current rate, and then in levels 2, 3, and 4. So again, there's no rate increase on the consumption rate in level 1, but there would be in levels 2, 3, and 4 that's proposed right now. And level 2 is a 15% increase, 3 is a 25% increase, 4 is a 35% increase. But remember what Donnie said about the probabilities of going into those levels too. So it would also be adding a 4th.
I'm not the financial expert here, but the rates are higher than just 15% because it's recovering. There's a base charge there. So the rates have been adjusted to be revenue neutral. So if you reduce, in level 2, the rate is adjusted to recover 15% reduction. So if a user reduces their use by 15%, they should see no difference in their monthly or in their annual bill. So the rate's a little bit higher than just 15% to accompany that.
So this is just a residential. Yes, so it is regardless of lot size for our residential customers. And that, by the way, that we'd be adding a 4th tier for during restrictions. Currently, we're only at 3 tiers, so we'd be adding a 4th. Again, that's just residential, just in case you guys live in the city. That's kind of a heads up. So for the commercial side of things, for the multifamily and the actual commercial water rates, this is just the summer because there's a winter and summer and non-summer rate. You can see the increases across. And for the commercial water rates, again, the first step would be up to that monthly amount before it crosses into the conservation step. This is different than the allotment. We're going to go into that next. Again, no change in level 1, increases in level 2, 3, and 4. These rates, I don't think these proposed rates are on the website because they're not official yet. They're going to council on the 18th, so we haven't put them on the website. Yeah, that would be the way to offer it. I mean, you can tell us, but the best way, the most effective way for you to do it would be to go to the city council meeting on the 18th and offer comments then. So just to be totally honest. Okay, so on the allotment side of things, so this is the yearly amount before you go through all the raw water, essentially the water rights that were paid for in the development process. So once you go over that, there is proposed to raise the amount in level 1 about 30 cents. Am I seeing that right? 30.6 cents. And level 2, 3, and 4 are fairly considerable jumps. So again, this is only during the time of water restrictions. A lot of people don't cross their allotment until later in the year, unless it's an irrigation-only tap, and then they might cross it a little bit earlier. There are some people that cross it in May, April, really early on in the year. Again, we can help do some analysis of, this is kind of a make-believe facility in town here. We can do some analysis to help you know when and if you cross your allotment and how much over you're paying per year. We can then just do some quick math to figure out an estimation if we go into restrictions at that time, how much you might be paying more for that. So if anyone needs assistance with that, please see me afterwards, and we can get you set up with a time to meet, and we can go through this. We can go through a lot of analysis on the water and energy side. So does that make sense? So the question was, at some point along the way, you heard that the city wants you to have a green lawn and to keep it green. And there is certainly a possibility that out of the development phase, out of the planning department, there is comments about wanting to keep kind of the look of the city and streetscapes and parkways and medians and all that kind of stuff a certain way. A lot of that is changing these days in the development process and in the planning department, how they want things to look. We actually just finished revising our streetscape standards, and instead of being almost all turf for medians and parkways and that between sidewalks and streets and whatnot, it's changed a lot more options and more or less going to xeriscape in a lot of areas of perennials and mulch and that kind of thing. So I can't say that there's no one at the city that wants you to have really green lawn, because you might like that a lot better. But certainly our streetscape standards have evolved in the last few years, especially going towards more of a kind of a natural, native, adapted kind of landscape. So I can't say that for sure that's totally out of the question. But you know, from the utility side, water conservation is a big deal, especially in years like this. And that's why we try to do projects in rebate irrigation equipment to make it as efficient as possible. But there's no particular code, though, that says you have to keep your lawn green. So again, these things are not restricted. These are okay. Trees and shrubs, flowers and vegetable gardens. This is mainly for when we're giving a presentation like this for residential folks, but just reminding them, and when at all possible, when watering these other parts of the landscape, using a shutoff nozzle. It's recommended all the time, but it's required in levels 2 and higher, instead of just letting the hose run. Or drip irrigation would be another one of those that you could use in levels 2 and higher. Always watering before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. whenever possible to avoid evaporation. Will we be handing out free shutoff nozzles? And yes, we will be. We have to bid those and buy them in a short time, because we're down to a couple boxes from the last time we ordered them. So we still have some available. I don't have any here today, but they are available. We can get them, and we'll be handing those out at events for residential customers as we go forward in the next couple months. All right, Donnie already covered this, but I love this little kid in front of the windmill. It's hilarious. Why, you know, a big reason why we went through last year and why we're only starting level 1 this year is that the community has reduced their use. That's across the board in every category: commercial, multifamily, residential, indoor, and outdoor. The biggest decrease we've seen is residential outdoor use, but the commercial outdoor use has seen a significant decrease as well. So thank you to all of you guys if you had anything to do with that. And just so you guys know, as the population has gone up since the last drought, has gone up 12,000-ish people, somewhere in there, I think, since 10 years ago, our water use has slowly declined total overall. So as the population's gone up, our total water use has gone down. What the city is going to be doing this summer, we are going to be monitoring complaints, and as we go out to monitor those complaints, we'll be essentially patrolling more or less as we go. We don't have plans to have a large patrol out just searching out issues. 10 years ago, again, neighbors were very effective at letting us know when their neighbors weren't doing so well. We did receive a lot of calls, though, about commercial properties 10 years ago, too. So that's something that we want to have, whether you're a well or raw water user, on file, and whether you've got a permit, and then we can answer those questions more effectively. And the more it's signed, we hope, the more people will understand. We're going to be doing a lot of work with residents on their sprinkler systems. We will continue doing our sprinkler audit program, which is about an hour-and-a-half, 2-hour visit to people's homes. And we'll also be doing a shorter visit just to help people reprogram their clocks, if necessary, because we want to help people meet the restrictions as much as we can. For residential customers, the turnaround time is early in the season. There's kind of a wait list. There's kind of a call log, because we hold the calls for about a month and then go through them all and put people on the list. So it can take, you can actually sign up for one technically now, or at least call and get on the wait list. So it's usually a couple weeks, though, once we start the program. And the program will run June, July, and August. That's a really good question. What do we tell the resident when we do a sprinkler audit, one of our free city sprinkler audits, and the system is just totally out of whack? What we let them know is, if it's an easy adjustment, we might let them know how to make that adjustment. If it's broken heads and leaks in the lines, obvious wet spots and soft spots in the grass, then we give them essentially a list of all those things that we saw. We give that to them and say, you really need to have this fixed. We can't say particular companies to go to. At this point, we're trying to figure out a way that we can do a regional program of, certain landscapers are being able to be on call or meeting certain requirements. But at this point, we can't do that. So we essentially tell them that if it's something that you feel comfortable with fixing, you need to do that. Otherwise, call a landscape contractor and have them come fix it. So it's voluntary whether we have them, raw water users, in our essentially database for water restrictions for wasting water. It's voluntary to be on that. But if we have info for a certain property, for a certain address, and somebody calls in on it, we can answer that question really fast. It would be by calling, I'll give you the contact is in that little brochure. It's that hotline number on there, 416-2881, or go by going to water-restrictions on our website. And there's going to be ways to link through to that. We do custom projects so what we have on rebates, the question was, you use almost mainly treated water only on the inside for CSU and almost all raw water on the outside. And are there ways to do something outside the box from toilets and the standard things and get rebate money for that? And the answer is yes. Ours is not based solely at this point on dollars per acre foot savings. It's based on equipment cost. So for better or worse, it's based on 25% of the equipment cost. So that would be a custom rebate. It has to save 20% over the previous process or technology or way it did it. So, yeah, absolutely. Please. There is not a rebate. The question is there a rebate for kitchen sprayers, the Prerinse spray valves? Currently, there's not a rebate. We actually are giving them away for free. We've had a Prerinse spray valve installer. He's made it to over 100 restaurants in town, giving them information. He's installed, I want to say, 70 plus of those spray valves. Really high efficient. We've seen everything across the board. We've reduced water use in some of the places tenfold in the dish station. So it's been a really effective program. City parks and golf courses are going to try to meet the restrictions and or file permits if they can't meet the restrictions to essentially follow the same thing that everybody else has to, even though they use 80% raw water. So even on all the raw water sites, they're going to try to follow the restrictions as well. And on all the sites with treated water, obviously we're going to be following that. Donnie covered it a little bit. We're going to be trying to increase the ability to treat polluted water this year. There's a project happening right now for the pre-sedimentation basin. And we're going to continue the plan for expanding Halligan Reservoir. Does anybody know where Halligan Reservoir is? A few do. So it's been in the works for quite a long time to expand Halligan Reservoir. And Don is shaking his head because it's a long, long process. But anyways, we're going to continue to do that, which would help us through continued drought years and to have more water storage, as he pointed to before. Oh, sorry. Halligan Reservoir is northwest of town, and it is from, do you know where Livermore is? So it's a little bit northwest of that. It's actually just north of Cherokee Park Road, a few miles west of 287, on the north fork of the Pooter. Ways that people can help reduce use, though, as residents or commercial folks, is following the water restrictions first off, knowing what they are, knowing the days and times, knowing what you can and can't do, following them. Inviting us for a presentation. We are happy to come to your business, your organization that you're a part of on the side, any group essentially, and give a community water restrictions talk, 15, 20 minutes, answer questions, hone it to something particular if you would like it to, bring certain staff if you're interested in a certain question, and we want to be available, we are available to come and give presentations and talk with you guys more. And getting rebates. I've been able to really bolster the commercial rebate program in the last couple years. We started from nothing 2 years ago, and now we have toilets, clothes washers, commercial dishwashers, commercial irrigation equipment, and again, custom projects. The limits on those are typically $5,000 per account per year, typically for the average account. For those with multiple accounts or are kind of extreme users, there is a different limit which matches their water use. All the information, again, you can find on the website. It'll be linked through that water restrictions website. And one really cool thing for those who are small businesses in the room, if you haven't heard about this yet, we just launched a program for small business efficiency grants. So this is extra money on top of rebate dollars to do certain projects. The definition of the small business I'm not going to get into here. But you can't be a real large property or facility. It's up to an additional $5,000, and that's combined between energy and water. So it could be a water project, it could be an irrigation equipment project. It could be a toilet project. It could be a lighting project. It could be any of those things. So it's additional money to go towards the project cost, up to 75% total of the project cost. Or for the small businesses that haven't ever had our BTU program, come and do an analysis and adjustments on the facility, we'll actually pay up to 100% now of that BTU, which that's a building tune-up going through all the programs of the HVAC systems, going through lighting programs, going through as much as you can of the facility and fine-tuning those things to maximize the efficiency of the equipment essentially you already have on site. So it's a really good program, really good savings from that. You have to do an energy and water assessment first, and the project must be completed by December 1st. So there's about 7 months here, I think, 8 months to do that. Otherwise, there's some contact info. Any last questions? It's a $45 rebate for soil moisture sensors. Yes, so any soil moisture sensors that connect into the in-ground sprinkler system are eligible for that $45 rebate. But using a soil moisture sensor overall it's a great way to do it, and then setting the days to the certain days for, say, a resident, it will let it know exactly how much to water on those days, more or less. On an old clock, you'd have to set it. Anyways, we can get into that later. So the question was on sprinkler audits, how do we look at the soil and analyze that and recommend programming the clocks for making sure that the water doesn't run off. And we do recommend what we call cycle soak, and that's cycling up to a 1/4 inch of water at a time, and then letting it have the time to soak in, and then applying another 1/4 inch. So essentially we're asking people to do, if they can go down to 2 days a week, 1/2 inch per watering cycle, and doing that in 2 rounds to let it soak in. So that's how we're addressing that. We do a soil analysis, a probe into the ground to take a look at the roots, to take a look at the soil. We don't go very deep into that because it takes some time for our auditors to really learn. We're really generally looking at root depth and talking with the customer about what that would mean and how to do cycle soak, get the water deeper, and grow longer roots. When you apply for a 4 acre or more permit for the large property permit, we'll go through the type of heads and the amount of area, and we won't necessarily be out there with catch cans monitoring every day that you do it, but if necessary, it's written in that we can verify the sprinkler controller and making sure that it's running what you said it was going to be running. So the question is, given the certain days, can you water across the midnight line? Like most people do water 10 a.m., they might water 10 p.m. through to 2 a.m., which is not a bad thing. But no, you won't be allowed to do that. You'll have to wait till 12:01 to start watering if that's your day. And a note on that, people could potentially overwater on water restrictions. It's not unforeseeable at all for someone, especially residents, to set their clock for 10 hours in the morning and another few hours in the evening and absolutely overwater, use way more than they did before, and have their bills shoot up. So we're going to be trying to educate customers as much as possible about how to do that. Is there any rules about contractors or others reading water meters on commercial properties? Generally, no, it's not okay to read the meter because it's technically city property. Usually, though, if the meter is easily accessible, I think it's very necessary that you know how much water that you're using through your system. And we'll talk after this about that. But one thing I do want to point out is that with our advanced meter project that's going in, every electric and every water meter is getting replaced in town. And definitely by this time next year, hopefully by September or so, you'll be able to see yesterday's data in full of water and electric use online or on your phone. Larger customers will still be able to, we're going to work out some way. Currently we have the MV web, and so we're going to at least keep that going, if not, if we can't improve upon that with the web portal system. So yeah, it's so what it's going to be is hourly data for water and 15-minute data for electric. Yeah, that's better than nothing. Exactly. So the electric, we can that's the max that the meter can read and that we can store in our in process data-wise. For the water, the reason that it's an hour is that it has to be battery run, and that allows us to replace the batteries 4 times less. Yes, yep, there will be several different alerts that you can set, either default ones or ones you can do on your own and have them go to email, phone, whatever, however you want. No, not yet. Just because the whole way it cycles through and goes onto like the web portal is not set up yet. So we haven't thought about necessarily signage. I think that's a great idea to bring up. I'll bring that up to the group for sure as special signage in those cases where people might normally have gotten a permit but don't. But we are trying to get going on essentially an awards program for folks to recognize them in maybe a similar way to what ClimateWise does, but as kind of from the city as a whole, or from utilities, for just that, those reasons, for decreasing water use and helping out. We can't see water 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or else that violates the restrictions. But the whole idea of what you're getting into, of what's happened, especially in the last 10 years since we wrote the ordinance, is that we do apply water a lot slower than we used to. We apply it a lot different. We use totally different technology, and the ordinance essentially at the end of this year is going to need a fairly significant rewrite on how we administer it and how we enforce restrictions. So to your point, yes, there are some conflicts there, but for most residential applications that we've seen and home sizes and turf areas, through our audit program, we've been able to suggest for people to water a half inch in less than 8 hours. Fairly used typically. So if you have certain exceptions, I wouldn't be up for chatting about them, but we can't, on a residential situation, we can't let it go outside of those 2-day windows, the 10 and the 10 to 6. And now part of the issue, it does kind of keep coming back to this idea on, especially in residential areas, that might force the lawn to turn brown in some ways, especially if the lawn has been seen 5 days a week watering for the last 10 years. But again, going back to the fact that we are short on water, and that's where the community and the city council has chosen to curtail water essentially to make up that shortage. So yes, we're going to see some brown lawns, but that's kind of a point of it's not the point of water restrictions, but it's one of the one of the effects of it, side effects, yeah. So, okay, hey, thanks guys.